World War II. We will be looking at World War II split into two parts, really, actually three, but the war in two parts. We'll first be looking at World War II in Europe, and then the next part of the chapter we'll look at World War II in the Pacific. And then finally, the last part will be World War II on the home front, basically life in America and the Holocaust. All right, so when looking at World War II, you have to look at the rise of what are called totalitarian dictatorships, governments basically ruled by a dictator that have absolute power within their country. Starting with Italy, in 1922, Benito Mussolini takes over the country. He's a World War I veteran. He was a newspaper editor and then goes into politics, becomes the head of the fascist party in Italy, and then takes over the government in 1922. He's appointed to be prime minister by the King of Italy. And there's a picture of Mussolini. Once he takes over, he started a military buildup, especially in the Navy. Those are Italian warships that will fight in World War II. Mussolini sees himself basically as the next Julius Caesar and wants to rebuild the Roman Empire. When you start talking about the Roman Empire, you have to realize just how big it was. There's the Roman Empire in the 1st and 2nd century. Meanwhile, it's going to be another decade, but in 1933, Adolf Hitler will become the dictator of Germany. There's a picture of Hitler in a parade. Hitler tried to overthrow the German government in the 1920s. Back in 23, it's known as the Beer Hall Putsch. In the city of Munich, he attempted to overthrow the government. Basically, it starts in the beer halls of Munich, which Munich is famous for. However, it fails. They marched out and ran into police and the German military, and they were stopped. Hitler ends up being found guilty, goes to jail for a year. While he's there, he writes his book, Mein Kampf. In 1932, after getting out of prison, Hitler realized he wasn't going to be able to overthrow the government, and he starts running Nazi party members for office, including himself, and eventually he ends up as chancellor. Then, shortly thereafter, in 1933, the Reichstag, which is the German parliament building, burns down. All right, so the Reichstag burns down. Hitler claims that it's a plot by the communists to overthrow the government, and the Constitution of Germany at the time allowed him to have emergency powers. There's the Reichstag building. Hitler, in his book, had written about building a new German empire in Eastern Europe. And so, against the Treaty of Versailles, he starts to rearm Germany. Political affairs, looking at the 1930s, the Great Depression we talked about, of course, with the U.S., but realize the Great Depression is not just an American thing, it is a worldwide thing. All the industrialized countries are affected during the 1930s by the Great Depression. And there's, you can kind of see that map is just showing you how the change in output for their industry during the time period. And we are, of course, talked about tariffs, the Hawley-Smoot tariff that the U.S. enacted and other countries enacted their own tariffs, and the situation got worse. Going back to World War I, the Allies still owed the U.S. $10 billion, and because of the Great Depression, they stopped paying, which caused a lot of Americans to resent the Allies. Right? And so you see an isolationist type of movement in the U.S. during the 1930s. To that end, polls show in the 1930s that most Americans thought that the U.S. getting involved in World War I was a mistake. We should have stayed out of it. And so Congress in 1935 passes the Neutrality Act, and it made it illegal to sell weapons to countries that were at war. A year later, they pass another Neutrality Act. This time, Congress makes it illegal to loan money to countries that are acting aggressively. And then the Neutrality Act of 37 banned the export of any goods to countries at war, and it made it illegal for Americans to travel on their ships. Of course, that would go back to the sinking of the Lusitania in World War I.